let's talk through this DeepSeek revolution. Many people are thinking about what's going on in America. Why is it that we have a Chinese company that is able to produce things for pennies on the dollar against American technology companies? America is supposed to be number one. What's going on? Is there a problem? Do we not spend enough money? Are we not regulating, or are we regulating too much? Right? What are the different things that are playing a role here? So I definitely have some opinions on this, and it's a subject that I've been thinking about for the last, I'd say, probably 10 years or so. And let's get into the details here. So first up, we have monopolies in the United States. If we look at the major tech companies, I think even a fairly uninformed person would say that big tech has a control over not only the sector that it's in, but also our government. If we look at the latest inauguration, there's pictures of these tech oligarchs who are worth billions directly talking with the president of the United States. So what can we really dive into the details on to figure out how that would potentially play a role in this lack of innovation? Well, one of the things that we can look at is that monopolies underperform versus startups. And the reason why they underperform is that they're able to have these illegal methods of competing. So one of the ways they can have illegal competition is that they spread misinformation. A good example would be with Windows. It was going to have some major problems with Linux, which is open source software initially, and there was the release of the Halloween docs. And so the Halloween docs were a famous leak about how Microsoft, including the founder Bill Gates, was involved with spreading misinformation and saying that Linux was not good and that it was inferior and you shouldn't use it. And it's kind of a classic way to make people doubt, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Hey, should I not use Linux? Is there a problem with it? And then later, what we discovered was that there was really this misinformation was their strategy to compete, not make something better or make it 10 times better or 100 times better. Their goal was to illegally compete with something that was free. Now, if we look at the year 2025, in fact, Linux is the predominant operating system for server. It is superior to Windows, widely known that you should use Linux for server operating system. I would even say, if you look at 2025, it's shocking that people still use Windows as a desktop solution, or even OS 10. I would say those are inferior to Linux as well. If we look at the Linux desktop, Ubuntu is something I use for my desktop operating system, and I find it to be vastly superior to Windows. Current implementation of Windows are actually indexing your hard drive and sending that data to some remote company, right? These are things that are not innovations, right? They're predatory services that add zero value. In fact, they're negative value to the consumer. If we look at a company like Meta, for example, what have they really produced? They had a hot or not website in the Harvard dorm room of Mark Zuckerberg that got turned into a social network. Better social networks were formed. For example, Instagram was more popular, but Meta was allowed to buy it. Also, WhatsApp, a better messaging platform, originally built on a very innovative technology solution. Erlang, something I've done in my past. I've used that language, and they had 1 billion users. They were allowed to buy it. The administration of the United States, and it's really not Democrat or Republican, both have just fell over and let the tech companies do whatever they want. And this happened actually under the Obama administration. So you can look at Meta just completely running roughshod over all of these other competitors by being able to illegally compete. And then when they get the celebrities onto the platform, they reduce the reach of the celebrities down to, let's say, 1% versus if they had their own web page. And if you look at what's happening with Meta and newspapers as well. They've crushed most of the newspapers. Now people go to Facebook to get information, and Facebook is full of misinformation, disinformation. So it's an inferior product. Likewise, if we take a look at Google, at one point they did some really innovative things with search. It was the best solution. But then because we've let them buy and buy and buy and have market domination, most people in 2025 would say that Google is a terrible search engine, and there's actually much better solutions available, including things like Kagi search, which is something I personally use. So if we look at this idea that big tech is somehow innovative, really the data does not bear that out. And we also look at the talent. Like if you get paid $500,000 a year, you're going to want to work at these big tech companies. But if that was distributed out to lots of different companies, the talented people would be able to work at these other locations. And then if we further dive into some of the supporting factors around big tech, for example, the low taxation rate for corporations, which is very different than it was in the 1960s. It encourages excessive CEO pay. So are the companies innovating, or are they encouraging the CEO to do things that will increase their pay and have short-term profits? And I think we're seeing more of that, right? We have these CEOs who are making, thousands times more than the regular employee, and they're delivering bad products. So we shouldn't be surprised that they are really not innovating at the level that we would expect something to innovate at if it didn't have those constraints. Now, let's also take a look at the startup ecosystem. You say, oh, well, look, this is the Sputnik moment. Andreessen said that, we need to really compete. It's China versus the USA. It's like, well, let's actually dive into this a little bit and deconstruct the myth that startups somehow are innovative. Really what startups are in the Bay Area is they're exploitive. And startups are about creating exploding exits versus innovation. So I would say the perfect example that I recently came across in 2024 was I took a train from Seattle down to downtown, and it's just a few bucks, and it was very convenient. I just take a few steps down into the train station, get on the train, very pleasant ride, very safe ride. But an Uber costs $80. So wait a second here. How is it that it's actually I have to walk further than I do with the train, right? The Uber is in some weird location. The Uber driver, maybe they show up, maybe they don't show up, and it's $80 for an Uber versus I just walk on a train and take there. So if you look at a lot of the startups, they don't care about actually creating a long-term solution. What they want is they want companies to do very risky things and to create the appearance of a product or an appearance of an innovation. So that gets us to the current problem with OpenAI. So what is OpenAI? Well, it's a startup from the incubator Y Combinator. No, what is Y Combinator? Y Combinator is similar to Andreessen in that they fund startups. But the methodology here is that, let's say you have 100 or 200 startups, you want them to do extremely risky things so that one of them has an outsized exit. Also, you don't care what happens afterwards. You just walk away. You push the negative externalities onto the public. And this model is actually called regulatory entrepreneurship. You find a legal gray area, you exploit it, and then you walk away, and the public has to clean up the mess. The classic way of thinking about externalities would be a manufacturing firm that dumps oil into a river. The people down the river, they didn't get the benefits of the profits from what was ever manufactured in the facility, but they also get the negative externalities, right? So this is a problem with externalities that we see with the startups. A good example, if you take a look at the Airbnb system as well, in Europe, they're banning Airbnb everywhere because we're able to push these illegal hotels all over tourist areas where the people that own it, they get some benefit from it. But what about the residents? There's no longer a community. The housing prices get increased. There's houses that are vacant for, let's say, 6 or 8 months out of the year because there's not a tourist season. These are negative externalities that if there was proper regulation and some balance, hotels have to have regulations that they abide by, or zoning, right? We would be able to get a more elegant solution. So when people think about, oh, let's just put more money into startups, and Y Combinator in particular, which the current CEO of OpenAI ran, now we start to get into to why potentially there could be a problem. And if you dive into some of the business practices as well of OpenAI, where there's a lot of research that has shown that the data sets were not obtained in a method that potentially is law abiding, and also the data sets themselves could come from sources where, in the case of Meta, there's some information that it was a known pirated data sets. So why are they doing those kinds of things? We had whistleblowers, for example, with OpenAI talk about this. So if you dive into the details, what are they doing? Are they innovating, or are they skirting the law, or are they diving into this regulatory entrepreneurship concept? If we know that Y Combinator's methodology is to do these, gray area kinds of behaviors, and that's what they call innovation, we shouldn't be surprised that a small team of people in China are able to outcompete the OpenAI ecosystem and build something for pennies on the dollar. So I think that's really the story here, is not about China versus the USA. It's to really look into the startup ecosystem. Is that actually the best way to innovate in America? And also to look at big tech monopolies and go, is that really the best way to innovate in America? What could we do to make it more supportive for small entrepreneurs and small teams? Now let's talk about what we could actually do. So one of them is that the healthcare system in the United States is widely known to be one of the worst in the world for the amount of money that we spend. So if there was a single payer system where healthcare was affordable and that bankruptcy wasn't constantly looming over you, that could really encourage innovation. We know that the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is, in fact, the healthcare system, which is shocking. So why would you take the risk of being bankrupt from failing at the startup and being bankrupt at, your healthcare? What if you accidentally get cancer, or you have, a heart problem, or you have maybe some kind of traumatic injury? Now you have to actually worry about being bankrupt from healthcare as well. So there's too many risks that are put onto the entrepreneurs, and the only method that they can use to become an entrepreneur is to get into one of these incubators. And then we're brainwashing students who are going to universities, maybe going to Stanford or Harvard, that they have to get into an incubator. But wait, are they really an entrepreneur, or are they an employee of the incubator because the incubator is feeding them hand to mouth? So I think that's a great place for people to look into. Why is America failing? Is why do we have a failure on the healthcare system, a failure on income inequality with monopolies, oligarchs, and tech pay? What could we do to make it so that you're not only going to get a job at big tech, or only going to go into one of these tech startups? So I think the real story here is less about China versus America. It's that the entire system of America is something that needs to be looked at. And if you look at Europe, for example, they actually could be watching America, watching China, and going, we could play a role here, because we have actually a reasonable healthcare system. We have reasonable quality of life rules as well. If we were very thoughtful and we encouraged more entrepreneurship, we decreased some of the bureaucracy in Europe. I think it's clear to anybody that's involved in business, you don't want bureaucracy, right? Nobody's a fan of that. But that doesn't mean that you also need to have no regulation. And if you had sensible regulations, like a lot of the regulation that's happening in Europe is very sensible, data protection, etc., they could play the leading role in technology in the next 25 years. So I think it's debatable whether America will be the leader in technology. If you look at the current leadership, you look at the structure of the big tech companies and how exploitive they've been, and how they make inferior products to free products. I don't see a pathway for America being the leader in technology. I do see a pathway for other regions, China, India, EU, maybe South America. So really, the 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 future is open for regions that can look at what America is doing that is inferior to other regions. Uh, and Europe, in particular, I think, is potentially going to be one of the leaders or a potential leader in this race for technology. And another point, I guess, to close with is this idea that, being successful is making the most amount of revenue, or, a CEO gets paid $100 million. How is that actually success? What the success metric should be is, uh, are we mitigating the harms of a technology? Are the majority of the citizens in that region benefiting from society? Uh, and also, are we able to use a sane regulation system to make sure that the benefits are had by the majority of people in the region, and there's a low amount of negative externalities that are pushed onto the public. So I think reframing things in a more holistic way. You look at global warming, you look at misinformation, and you also look at income inequality, and you frame the innovation in that lens. Has America ever been innovative? Maybe it was actually in the 1960s, maybe the 1970s. That's really the peak of innovation. But since the 80s, the 90s, etc., it's been more about fake innovation and fake success and exploding exits, and companies that are really not complying with the laws. And so, could that be the solution for America, or could it be an opportunity for regions like Europe?